I believe everybody who should be has been promoted to a panelist. Welcome everybody to today's webinar. The topic is what comes next for the CTMC and what will it look like in 2022. So I'll let our course directors take it from here.
Great. I'm going to share some slides that I have prepared. For those who maybe aren't familiar, as we've done a broad invitation, this is the clinical trials methodology course, which is supported by NINDS and also the American Academy of Neurology with these grant numbers. I do not have a slide with the course directors, but the course directors are myself, Will Moyer. I'm a professor of emergency medicine and neurology here at the University of Michigan. Dr. Lori Gutman, who is a professor and chair of neurology at the at Indiana University. Dr. Christopher Coffey, who is a professor of biostatistics at the University of Iowa. Dr. Robin Conwit, who is at NINDS, and Dr. Roger Lewis, who is a professor of emergency medicine at Harbor, UCLA. Again, acknowledging our funders for the course. Some disclosures for me, I get money from the NIH for various clinical trials, also some money from medical legal consulting and a little bit of consulting with Berry Consultants, and some money from some medical journals. So here are the parts that we will talk about. And it may seem a little counterintuitive, particularly for those who have taken the course, to review the application process, but there's some hidden gems there, and I think it'll be a useful exercise. We also want to describe the second year concept and also describe additional opportunities for support going forward. However, one thing that I do want to emphasize is that we as a course continue to evolve, and we want to continue to meet the needs of faculty who are interested in developing their careers in clinical trials in the neurosciences. So we are hoping for some participation from those of you who are here, and questions and some feedback in the chat. So at this point, again, introductions are always a little bit challenging in terms of the Zoom world, but if you could take a moment and let us know if you took the CTMC before and when, or if you're CTMC faculty, or if you took the CTMC and became faculty, if you're current, future, or past CTMC faculty. Your department and institution and your role, whether it's at your assistant professor, research coordinator, project manager. We value everybody who is here and their contributions. And have we made it so that they can make chats? I guess, Courtney, or are they not allowed to do chats? Are they only allowed to do Q&A? This is a...
They should be able to use chat. If not, you can use the Q&A feature, but it is set so that you can use the Q&A.
I saw that chat was open, and maybe it was only open to the panelists. I see that Dr. Conwit can use the chat, but she's a panelist. All right, Dr. Quigg is here. All right. Hello, Dr. LC. All right, so yeah, I'm going to keep going. I mean, but I do want people to try to put their information there, just so I can see who the folks in the audience are. Great. So a couple of the things that we just wanted to review, and this is something for those of you who've taken the course or applied to the course, will be a little bit review, but I think it's worthwhile reviewing as you prepare other grants or prepare other projects. So first we're going to talk a little bit about the NIH definition of a clinical trial, and then the NINDS mechanisms for clinical trials, which I think are very, very helpful to sort of scale and scope things. So there's a lot of words here, and again, you all can read faster than I can talk, but basically both the common rule and the NIH have a common definition where basically you're doing a research study on humans where people are going to be prospectively assigned to an intervention. And this is in one or more groups. So even a single arm study, which arguably you could say is a cohort, if it's involving an intervention or something that's meant to change things in a way that you're going to measure, then that would meet the NIH clinical trial definition. And these could be interventions on biomedical or behavioral health related outcomes. So first, I'm going to talk a little bit about the application process and the FAQs. And I think this serves two purposes for those of you who've taken the course and sort of thought about your project afterwards or worked on your project afterwards. Kind of understanding what we're looking for can be helpful and maybe reflective, and also for others that you may be recommending the course to. Obviously, if you haven't taken the course before, you can get a sort of sneak preview of what the questions we ask and we would want you to prepare for to consider being in the course. At this point in time, we fully anticipate to have a course that looks a lot like our course did in 2019 and earlier years. In all of our years, going back to when we had our first cohort in 2014, we've used a combination of distance learning and small groups that have occurred via video teleconference, along with an in-person or intense experience that happens either in Iowa City or Ann Arbor, Michigan. And this July, we anticipate that it will be in Iowa City. The in-person experience will be in Iowa City, followed by additional small group meetings to develop a project. That this is a course that is focused on developing a clinical trial protocol. First, a protocol, how you are going to do your prospective study, assigning participants to one or more interventions. And from that, you derive potentially a grant application if you don't have flexible funding to resource that clinical trial. So we anticipate that the 2021 course, at least for new projects, will look much like the 2019 and earlier courses. We will talk a little bit about some of the opportunities for folks who went through our 2021 course, where there was only a virtual intensive experience in the midsummer, but the small group experience mirrored that of the prior years, and the project development mirrored that of the prior years. We have some ideas for things that we would be inviting folks who would be sort of second year trainees. So we'll talk about that as well. So looking at the application instructions, and we will be meeting in terms of our executive committee to adjust our instructions. But typically you create a single PDF and upload it through a portal through REDCap. If you're submitting a revised application, if you have a previous unsuccessful application, you can get an extra page to kind of talk about what sort of tweaks that you've made to your application in response to the feedback. And there's 6 basic parts to our application. Helpful hints. Brevity is beauty. And again, I can't say for sure, but in most cases, we have pretty strict page requirements, and lack of brevity usually means lack of clarity. And yes, it is hard to get your great ideas onto one sheet of paper in some of these sections, but if you sacrifice brevity to the point where we need additional detail to understand what's going on, and if you've turned it in early, we can always ask you for clarification if there isn't enough there to understand. I would say that, and again, I don't want to speak for all of the other course directors, usually we sometimes have trouble understanding exactly what's going on with your idea, mainly because there's too much information there and it's kind of filtered out somewhat in the noise. So again, I could write a 5-page paper, in a couple hours, but trying to get that 5-page paper down to 1 page of the key points would take me weeks. So again, I'm not saying this should take you weeks, but a focus on really hitting the high points is very important. So for the first page, we asked you to talk about your scientific area, and we need to be educated somewhat on the areas of scientific uncertainty in your field. We have a great deal of expertise across the course directors who do the reviews of these applications initially, but in many subspecialty areas, you are definitely going to have to educate us so that we can kind of understand what's going on with the specific niche area that you might be looking into. But we want to also understand what's the basis for doing this study now? Why is this study the right next step? Do you have the good preclinical data or behavior change theory to say that this is what is needed for patients going forward? And the best types of projects you confirm preclinical or sort of pre, epidemiological or barrier assessment from qualitative research. They're confirming some preclinical aspect of your potential intervention, and whether that's the dose. And dose can mean a lot of things. Dose can mean typical drug doses and their concentrations. Could mean how often you text somebody if you're doing a text messaging study. We would use dose as a relatively broad definition of how much stuff you do to somebody in your intervention. Mechanism and target acquisition. Is this treatment hitting the things that you think are going to move the needle to improve outcomes? We want to see that there's clear output from the CTMC project. After the trial you design, we should be able to see how and if the next project should be done. And the answer may not always be that the next project should be done. Sometimes you may, because of the feasibility data you're collecting in this trial you're designing for the CTMC, you may learn that your study is not feasible as designed, and you need to kind of retool and recreate in another way. Some of the other things that we want covered in part 1A, and again, I think we'll make sure to illustrate this in the instructions. If you want to use hyperlinks for your references to PubMed to save space, that is fine. We don't have an additional literature cited page, as we do not want to encourage a lot of citations. Certainly, citations of a few key articles can be very helpful, but a very long list of every word, every sentence being cited may be a good strategy in grant applications so that people can see the large amount of evidence that's sort of going into each statement. But for us, we are really focused on the big ticket items as to whether the study is right for you and whether the study is right for science. We do want to make sure that you've addressed somewhat what was good and what was maybe not so good about the existing research out there in generally a positive way. This is largely inspired by the instructions for significance in NIH grant applications, and that you must consider how high of quality and how much rigor there was in the preclinical or prior clinical experiments in that area. Then we move on to part 1B. To a certain extent, part 1B is a hedge for us as faculty, as the course directors. We really want to see your ideas distilled in a way that, in a structure that we've sort of built on. So this is, you're free to kind of organize 1A to a certain degree how you want to tell the story of why your study should be, is the right thing to be doing. But in 1B, we have very specific bullet points so that if we weren't, largely speaking, if we weren't able to exactly figure out what you were doing, we can quickly scan and get a sense as to what your idea entails and what that study might look like. We do recognize that how to design the clinical trial is what we want you to be doing in our course. So we do have some room for latitude here, but this also helps us find things that often aren't a really good fit for the course. Like if you're designing a 100-center, 10,000 patient mega trial, our course is likely not to be a good fit for you because we are more interested in designing mostly single center, and some diseases are so rare that single center is not feasible, but mostly single center studies that are helping to lay the groundwork for some of those larger multi-center studies. But basically by bullet pointing things down, we want to know what condition you're studying, if there's a specific phenotype, and really what your main goal is. What do you need to learn? What do you want to learn in this study to move things forward? Knowing that we're going to work with that through the course and refine that. And what's the basic biological rationale? What's the main thing that you think you need to measure in the study? And again, avoidance of a underpowered study that by looking at a efficacy endpoint is something that we definitely appreciate, and about how big a study you think you need, knowing that we're going to refine this and what you might do next, and how this like sort of overarching line of work may change practice. We do have some work where biomarkers can be included, and we have some very specific requests in terms of the level of development of the biomarker, which I'll go into in a moment. This is a hypothetical way of approaching these bullet points, and I would say that I did answer all of these in one sentence, but we're looking at TBI. But to be specific, we were talking about comatose patients without space-occupying extraaxial hemorrhage. You could put the GCS here. I'm just sort of saying coma, and we can expand on what GCS that includes. But it doesn't really matter for us. We get that these patients are comatose. These aren't awake patients. This is the main phenotype. And the two parts to determine if agent X reduces cerebral edema. And then in terms of the preclinical data, well, there was a pig experiment which showed that this really reduced the progression of cerebral edema versus placebo. So that kind of very quickly answers the sort of main questions is what's the preclinical evidence, that with a main outcome of cerebral edema measured by ADC mapping on MRI, 25 to 50 patients. And the goal here is developing proof of concept. If this proof of concept was demonstrated on brain edema, then they would work to establish this larger study with differences in dosing schedule and inclusion criteria. You could see how such a agent would be very useful, as we currently lack pharmacotherapy for TBI in large part. And then if this was a biomarker study, let's say one of your collaborators is doing this clinical trial, but you're interested in developing a companion biomarker, then it talks about this here. Or if you want to develop a companion biomarker as part of this study, this is talking about a little bit about the longitudinal dynamics of this biomarker. So there's a close linkage to therapy there. In part 3, we want you to list potential funding sources. One of the things that's very important to us is that if you're taking the course, we really want to help you develop a project that you will do. And the likelihood that the project could be done is something that plays into our decisions as to who we select into the course or who we think is a good fit for the course. So local pilot mechanisms, foundations, those are potential areas where you may be applying to funding. A lot of NIH mechanisms aren't really friendly to early phase clinical trials. So you want to make sure to look and not necessarily list things that historically aren't areas where clinical trials are funded, and potentially review funding histories on NIH Project Reporter to assess whether there are some clinical trials already funded or ongoing. You can look at clinicaltrials.gov there as well. Because if somebody is already doing the study that you're envisioning, then you may need to come up with an idea that is a little different, as it may be, or some way of collaborating or something. Just doing a completely replicating a study that's already funded, you'll be a little bit at a disadvantage. For NANDS, at least, if you're looking to go down into a K23 in terms of the project, the clinical trial aspect must have mechanistic aims. So that can be a little bit of a challenge. Now, as other institutes have different rules in terms of what sorts of clinical trials may be eligible, particularly NHLBI is a large institute where cardiovascular risk factors often play both into stroke and heart, lung, and heart. So, and in cardiology, so they and hypertension. So some of our trainees have definitely been focused on things that might go to NHLBI. Similarly, National Institutes of Aging, National Institutes of Mental Health, other institutes where people may have neuroscience trials, look at things a little differently. So you just need to make sure that ultimately a clinical trial design is something that would be compatible with the types of grants you might be submitting. I will say, if you're hoping to do a small scale clinical trial and get an NINDS R21, this is pretty hard to do. I will say that. So and I would say it's really hard to do. And you would certainly, if you think you want to go down that road, definitely talk to somebody at NINDS first. There are other institutes, notably the National Institute of Drug Abuse, where R21s are very frequently used for early phase trials. So it's it varies, but just know that at NINDS, if you write that into your plan without having, for us, we would be a little worried that you hadn't done your homework, because at NINDS, it's not going to work. Yeah, like strongly discouraged. I'm going within what exactly it says in the web page, but Dr. Conway has provided a more unambiguous answer. And maybe Dr. Conway, you could broaden that, I think, to everyone. I think that was just sent to the host and panelists. But anyway, don't put R21 at NINDS onto your funding plan, because we will not look at that very well. All right, so the next part is you talk about the team in parts 3 and 4. So describing the members of your team at your institution and the interaction between the team and how the team is going to help you in your development. And this includes resources, whether there are project managers or research associates who are there to help you or would be dedicated as part of your idea, data managers or other data management resources. But a lot of this is the way that things may interact between your mentor and you, or your mentors and you. It's not infrequent, particularly in more specialized fields, to have both mentors within and without your institution. One thing that we are very interested in assuring is that you have some mentor within your own institution who is familiar with doing prospective clinical trials within the confines of your institution, as every institution has some quirks in terms of making these things work. So that even if you must have a scientific mentor who's perhaps at a different institution that's very focused on the subspecialty area, having a mentor from your institution who maybe is in a different subspecialty area but is very facile with running clinical trials at your institution will be important. Both your biosketch and the biosketches of your main mentor should have personal statements relevant to the course. So as to what your motivation for taking the course is and what you hope to get from it. There's not a actual personal statement letter. You can use the box on the biosketch. The chair letter is important, and having support from your department to do this course, which is a relatively large time commitment, is important. And these are the things that we're looking for in the chair's letter, particularly the competing responsibilities and what's going on in the year or two, the 2 years after the course, as it can take time to get a trial implemented. And again, if there are the institutional resources that are being brought to bear are important and something that we consider pretty seriously. Other materials, if you are planning to use an investigational compound, we want to see some evidence that that compound will be available to you for the potential clinical trial, particularly if it's a new unapproved compound being studied in a different disease area. Many sponsors are reluctant to share that with the concern that it could harm their molecule's chances if safety things were developed in this concurrent academic trial. But everybody's mileage may vary. There's different situations for sure. So biomarker considerations, we are amenable to biomarker projects. It takes a little bit of a unique development pathway, but these may be useful. Biomarkers may be useful if they're going to predict response, differentiate responders from non-responders of a particular treatment strategy, or prognosticate independently of a particular treatment, or demonstrate some proximal effect of a treatment as proof of a proposed mechanism of action. So that if it's an imaging biomarker per se, it shows you that your molecule is sticking to the receptor you think it is, for example. We are looking for applications that really aren't fishing for biomarker relationships, but identifying a single strategy or biomarker a priori that is going to be developing things further. And really the close relationship to a treatment strategy and how a treatment strategy may change in the future is something that's crucial. So if you're looking for developing new biomarkers through a more unstructured approach, our course isn't good at helping you design those things. And one thing that I didn't mention before that I will emphasize, you may have a really good scientific idea that is just not a good fit for our course. And that's not to say your scientific idea isn't good. And you just need to talk to us more to understand that it's good. We see many good scientific ideas, but they don't fall into the definition of a clinical trial. And typically when we sort of bend the rules around the edges, it's hard for our faculty to focus you along our development strategy if there isn't a close linkage to treatment and something that is a clinical trial. So that's, again, not to diminish any other forms of research. It's just a matter of where our strengths are in terms of our course faculty and our course design. And sometimes even after we've started the course, we come to the conclusion that there's maybe a different epidemiology study that you ought to be doing first. And that's okay. But if we see that on the application, we do try to avoid that. But if we come to that conclusion after trying to design the trial you've laid out, that is necessary sometimes. But again, we do try to prevent that. Major pitfalls: the study was too ambitious. You submitted an underpowered efficacy study, which is worrisome to us. You need to make sure that the stuff you want to use is going to be available. We don't really see clear go, no go criteria. For example, you maybe set some boundary for safety that we can probably pretty much tell in advance you're not going to go over, that we're going to show that the drug is safe, but we know that the drug has been very safe and well tolerated in other diseases. So its likelihood to be less safe in this other condition you're studying is pretty low. So that's a sort of asked and answered type design, which we definitely want you to be learning something useful in this clinical trial, and balancing what learning useful versus risk can be tricky, but that's what we're working to do. So one just quick thing about trainees, we've been doing the course for a while, and we've noticed that fellows have people who are in some form of a clinical fellowship have historically faced many challenges in terms of implementing projects. And then residents also who are not on a 2-year research block that is often seen in neurosurgery residencies face even greater challenges, as the focus in residency, as it should be, is developing your clinical skills in your specialty. And truly that's also if you swap out subspecialty for specialty, that's the goal of clinical fellowships as well. But an important part of our course, again, is there's a reasonable chance the clinical trial could get done. We don't want this this is not meant to be a theoretical exercise. We do want to help you develop, but we also want you to help move science forward by doing a clinical trial that will answer some important questions. All right, with that, let me pause there and see if there's any questions. And then I was going to move into some of the second year stuff. I think Dr. Hawk could ask the question. I think, Courtney, you could probably give Dr. Hawk speaking rights. Oh, accident. Okay, does not want speaking rights. Okay, that's fine. You don't need to give Dr. Hawk speaking rights. All right, I don't see any open questions now, but again, if they pop up, we will work to address them as we go along or at the end. So now I'm going to talk, and then also I would just sort of call upon any of the other course directors if there was anything that I missed or that they wanted to add at this point in time. All right, I see universal muting of my co-panelists, so I'm going to march on. All right, so then let's talk about something that will be novel for 2022, and that is the potential for a second year experience. So this is you took the CTMC in 2021, or possibly earlier, but really this is mostly focused on folks who took it in 2021. And what do you do next? I think if you have reached sort of an impasse with your project and you really feel like you need to start over, new idea, new project, then I think it is very reasonable to reapply. We will look at your application without any sort of, we will look at your application on its merits, and we will, one of the things that I want to stress is it's been a pretty weird couple of years with the pandemic, and we recognize that. So a lot of people have been pulled into places, both in their home lives and their professional lives, that nobody would have ever thought they were pulled. So if you want to you basically do a reboot and go through the course with the planned, actually physical summer residential experience, that is certainly an option for you if you were in the course in 2021. However, if you got stuck and really feel that you've got it in terms of a lot of the content, in terms of the initial project development, then there's a second year option that we're working to put more oomph into, and I think we will be able to work with trainees who are stuck, but I would say stuck at a relatively, they've made some progress, and the idea is still very viable, but needs additional tweaking of things. If you're still sort of working on the aims and objectives, then that's a fairly early stuckedness, and then maybe that's something that a reapplication makes more sense for. But if there's been some real, kind of superstructure placed on the idea, and it's a matter of tweaking things, inclusion criteria, some of the logistics, things like that, that could be a good second year option. It's also possible you made all of the expected progress for the course and have designed a trial sort of in full and are working now to submit that as a grant, or you've already submitted that as a grant. And then I think in the second year option, we would have set up sort of additional topics that we've covered in CTMCs or the CTMC advanced track in prior years, where we could provide you with a distinct curriculum where you would learn different things and different skills, but also have continuing access to some of the course faculty to help move your project along even further, or address resubmission needs if it's a study that needs to be resubmitted as a grant, or address other practical needs in terms of finalizing a protocol based on regulatory feedback. So some of the things, this would be a new pilot concept. We've been thinking about this, though, ever since recruiting our class of 2021 back in the winter of last year. So, but this, again, as I mentioned, the curriculum will be complementary and additive to what you have learned in the first year segment of the course. We could definitely anticipate more focus on recruitment, budgeting, how to lead a team. Again, obviously this is something that everybody could benefit from, but I think as some of the second years might be closer to actually rolling out their study, or have already rolled out their study, or starting to develop staff that they're working for, or who are working for them, I think some of this idea of leadership in clinical trials it will be a good area to provide some differentiated content for sort of the senior trainees. Deeper dive into regulatory. In addition, we've done some preliminary lectures on adaptive designs before. I think we could take a little bit of a deeper dive into that with some of the second years. So there's precedent in the original years of the course. We did have an advanced/adaptive track where a smaller group of projects were focused on coming up with clinical trial simulations and the sketch concept of a more complicated adaptive design, where we allowed multi-center studies. And some of these have led to some projects that have been performed, including a pre-hospital trial of ECMO. All right, so that's a little bit, again, we are also very open. We're going to be meeting as course directors to try to put some of the, the basic elements of the course forward. We are always open to suggestions and other things that people would like to see in a second year experience. So that is, we're definitely interested in what the needs are and what could be possible. All right, so in this, the sort of third and final part of the talk, and I think we're doing okay on time, so I do hope we can open up the conversation to sort of a wide range of other questions or thoughts or feedback for us or other things that could be helpful to you. We do have some opportunities. While the overall intent and the ask I had for the small group leaders was that, now that a good number of you have kind of progressed onto the mock study section we'll be holding later this week, that this sort of kind of ends the main structured experience with your small group leaders and your small group cohort. But it's to a certain extent, it does not need to be the end. We will continue to let you have access to Teams as a collaborative area for you. And I am sure that within the confines of everybody's busy schedules, that the faculty from clinical medicine and biostats in your small groups will certainly continue to provide you advice as they have time, knowing that everybody is busy, but that they've spent a lot of time looking at your project over the past year and thinking through things with you. So I think we would all be quite willing to meet with you and or kind of provide feedback asynchronously via email or other means. The other major opportunity, because we have a more formalized ongoing meeting structure, would be us, the course directors of the CTMC. Many, for most of you, at least, with the exception of maybe one small group, at least one of the course directors was in your group. So if you need ongoing feedback on your project and are a little sensitive to the time of your small group leaders, it's not to say that we on the executive committee are less busy necessarily, but we do have, we have some planning activities, but we do have a little bit of bandwidth to brainstorm projects or brainstorm areas where you may be blocked. And those could be potentially meetings where we could have you onto one of our exec calls to talk about things or also provide asynchronous feedback. Similarly, for the folks that had applied to the 2020 course where we didn't end up having a course, we did invite all of those folks who turned in applications to kind of talk to us about the feedback we gave them on those applications in real time. And I think that was useful to help move things forward. So there will both be both sort of synchronous and asynchronous opportunities to meet with the EC, which is mainly the course directors, myself and Courtney and Lisa, in terms of, we would certainly record those sessions, let you have notes, et cetera, et cetera. There's some potential for workshops that we will hold that are inspired by the CTMC. We've run these in certain years at AAN. I've run something inspired by this at the International Muscle Study Group. So there are other opportunities to have a sort of shallower dive into clinical trial development. And again, like we talked about, if there are folks here who are reapplying this year or are going to be turning in fresh applications, if those applications are turned in early, we can certainly set up a time where we can give you some feedback on your application. I will certainly try to give written feedback on applications that come in early. Everybody, particularly those who have participated in the course before, but even those who haven't or are considering doing so in the future, will be welcome to, as always, to attend our CTMC webinars next year. We will, again, some of the content will be overlapping because we do want to have a real-time opportunity for the new trainees to go through some of the basics of clinical trials with us. But we will be trying to hit some different topic areas to keep things fresh. So I think you will find the webinar series hopefully continues to be useful. And again, we will record those and have those on our website so that you can look at those at different times. Let's see. So I do want to highlight some of our overarching priorities in terms of the course. Our success is your success. And your success can help to improve health and the well-being of patients in the future through better clinical trials and better clinical trial design. So we do really appreciate when trainees dedicate some time to work with us. And again, we want to help improve the types of clinical trials that you are doing and you are applying for and that you are working on. So these are all important aspects of things. So I do want to thank you all for considering us for your future needs, and also for those of you who have spent some time with us in the course already as kind of past trainees or considering to become second-year trainees, still trainees. We do really appreciate you taking the time to be with us. I can speak on behalf of the other course directors and many of the faculty that it's really fun for us to help you design ideas. There's a lot of things in medicine and research that are, some of the things are more getting the job done, right? Writing that protocol, adding in all those details, getting it sent back by grant review, and so getting it sent back by IRBs. Those are really, important areas, and those are things to consider. All right, so major conclusions. The mission of the CTMC is to help faculty, help develop you as faculty and develop clinical trials in the neurosciences. We are going to be doing some form of a second-year experience to get the members of the 21 cohort into the room where it happens, so to speak, to sort of double down on the Hamilton analogies from our title of our talk and this conclusion statement. And we do want to support you. We want to help you develop your ideas. We know that there are substantial challenges and roadblocks, and we are sympathetic, and we will continue to do our best to try to get those things, to get things moving along for you and getting you onto the next steps for your career, to help to help you develop, but also to help you develop these great ideas. So with that, at this point, I will also reopen it for the other course directors to add anything while we await any questions in the Q&A or the chat. And depending on how many questions we get, I mean,
you have one question, Will, about whether 2020 cohort needs to reapply or just express interest to continue.
Yeah, so I think it will depend on where you are with the protocol. If you are more in the situation where you did not get majorly stuck, like where you think that starting fresh would be the best idea, we will be setting up some sort of process for you to indicate your interest, and we will be sending out something where we comprehensively ask everybody, and I know that everybody couldn't attend this this time, but we want to send out something to all of the 2021 trainees to just sort of make it clear, which of these three scenarios might you be falling into. Hey, I think I'm going to reapply. Number two, I want to kind of make more progress on the current protocol because it got stuck somewhere. Number three, the protocol didn't get stuck, but there's other, I want to work on some of those advanced topics. So what we will be doing an inventory where we ask you, or number four, maybe things are great and you've gotten to the point where it's all good and you just want to kind of come back and, or not come back. Maybe you might not be maybe infeasible in terms of the dates. So that's certainly fine. Or you may want to. So anyway, we'll send out unambiguous messaging that kind of helps you determine which of those you're going into. Yeah, we're going to discuss things in the programmatic meeting in early December. So we'll be sending that out after we just sort of clarify. We want to make sure we have the right way of asking it so you understand what you might be getting into. But we did, as those of you who are in the 2021 cohort who applied, we did say that we are committed to getting you into the room if you want to be in the room. So because there is a tremendous opportunity for networking and so forth. But we do want to make sure that the way that we're doing it puts you in a position where you're making some progress on your project. All right. Any other questions? Oh, there's another question. Yeah, so if you aren't able to, visit during the mock study section, we'll be recording it and we'll share the recording of your section with you. It's a little unusual, obviously, in a real study section, you don't get to watch. So we will, you will be able to look at the video of that section of the study section where we discussed your application, and we will share that with you. It's a good question. But yeah, although, apparently study sections are allowed to, for some large applications, are allowed to call and ask questions. I've been asked to be ready by the phone in case the study section had any questions for you. And it turns out they've never ever called me and asked me any of those questions, but in our mock study section, we won't. Dr. Gutman, are you unmuting? I see you pressing something, or are you?
Yeah, I was unmuting, but then you keep answering whatever I'm going to say, so it's perfect. You don't need to unmute. I will say that one of our former CTMC alums is presenting the results of his clinical trial at our grand rounds today at IU. He's at UVA, and so you do move forward. So don't get discouraged, and I continue to stay in touch with my former small group members, as do many other people. So I don't think, even without a formal return to course, so you'll still get feedback.
Yeah, and we're still working out some of the details. We do think that there's going to be some opportunities for the people who are in the 2021 course to provide advice to the first year fellows as well. But we're working to make sure everything's coherent and efficient, but we do hope. Well, in this Zoomy world where people have Zoom or other teleconference calls often stacked for hours throughout the day, I do take it upon myself to try to end 10 minutes early, so that people have a little time to stretch or do something before their next thing. It appears that I'm very close to having succeeded in that, and I don't have a very high success rate. It's probably somewhere around the usual typical type 1 error rate of trials, about 2.5%. But if there are other questions, my email is wmeurer@umich.edu. I will certainly put that in the chat. And again, for those of you who are active with us in the 2021 cohort, we will be communicating and messaging and getting an inventory of where you are. For those of you who filled out your outcome surveys, both from the 2021 cohorts and the 2019 and earlier cohorts, if you haven't done that yet, go dig up that link. We really are interested in your progress over time, and it helps us continue to make the course better to look at those things, and also helps us with the Institute. But with that, I think, unless there are other questions that I'm missing, I think we can probably adjourn at this time. And again, thank you all, and look forward to hearing more about where your projects are going and what you have planned next. And yeah, okay, the question about filling out the outcomes survey is yes, if you've received even the folks in the course currently may have received this outcomes survey. Some of the questions you will be asked next year, and you can certainly say you haven't met this, but a lot of it is a time to event thing. And we're saying, did you get your project submitted as a grant? If you didn't yet, that's okay. We want you to submit the outcome survey Sometime around October of this year, you'll get another one October of next year. And then you'll kind of fill in the times that you maybe submitted a grant, got a grant back, got patients in. So yes, if you received an outcome survey, even if you are one of the 2021 cohort, you know, we do want you to sort of talk about what you've accomplished so far, and then you will get, you know, knowing that it's short, right? Like you may not have really finished your project yet, which is okay, but some people have very compressed timelines and have submitted things to the IRB. So just trying to measure things and keep in touch with you on those forms. So again, certainly please try to fill out the outcome surveys if you've got them from REDCap. All right. With that, I will bid you adieu, and it was good talking to all of you.
Thank you, everyone. You guys have a great day. And as a reminder, if you're still on, the link to the evaluation is in the chat, and you'll have to take the evaluation if you would like your CME credit. So thank you all. Have a great day.